On this week's episode of the K-12 Tech Talk podcast, Chris and I are back from Vermont, and we get right into business with some updates on the FCC's cybersecurity pilot, and we make some predictions on how Trump's cabinet could shake out with E-rate. The main topic this week is an interview with Tony Sager, a member of the Center for Internet Security. Thanks for listening.
Live from the NTP studios, this is the K-12 Tech Talk podcast. I am Josh. I'm back. Beep. We're ready. This is going to be an episode. Hi, Chris.
What's up?
Not much. Mark?
Good to see you.
Yeah. Something I thought of the other day that we don't do a really good job. People know our names with our voices. It's like, I put a face with a name. People kind of, I guess, if they're not regular listeners, they don't know kind of the environments that we're in. My name's Josh. I'm from a district in Missouri that's, for Missouri, probably mid-sized district, but, other places in the country, we've got roughly 4,000 kids. Chris, give us a little metric here.
Also from Missouri, about 30 minutes south of you, I'm at 2,000 kids.
And Marcus, what do we even say? Reformed teacher.
So here's my new tagline. I could say is I went from the largest school district in Massachusetts to now the smallest one. And I'm
no kidding.
Yeah. Almost. Well, it's almost the smallest one, but it's I'm at a tiny little independent school right now, among other different projects. But that's the one that I'm having.
So you're officially out of retirement.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've fully retired, but yeah.
How many kids are there? Like
350.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
I know. I went from 50,000 to 350. It's crazy.
It all scales.
Are you going to go back to the classroom?
No.
Because surely there's not enough tech to keep you busy.
That's true. No, they do a good job there. So
cool.
Well, we have three pieces of news tonight. I kind of surprised you guys with this first one. It's something I didn't tell you about, and it's more bad news.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I mean, we're just in the season of bad news and hilarity. So,
by the way,
some would disagree with that.
By the way, Josh, last week, Chris and I were at Vermont Fest, and we hung out with each other the morning after the election.
Yes,
and we survived.
Yeah,
we thrived. In fact,
you had your How do I put this though? You are a card-carrying member of the demographic of Vermont, so nothing was going to you were going to be fine no matter what. You were with your people.
I did threaten Chris, I'm going to out you.
I cracked one joke during our presentation just to kind of fill out the room.
Yeah.
Did you get any laughs?
No, it was good.
Yeah,
it was good.
It was fine. It was good.
So if
Vermont Fest, by the way. Learned that most schools in Vermont are about the size of what we're used to, about this 3,000, 4,000, 1,000, whatever. So I just felt like I was hanging out with people like me, like
Corey,
good people up in Vermont. Yeah, people like Corey, better than Corey people. Probably, but great people, good people. It was a great time at Vermont Fest.
Less runt eating. So if you remember 2 weeks ago, gentlemen. I broke the news that we lost out on the Sexiest Podcast Host Award by People Magazine.
Tell me there was a second place.
There was not. They didn't even tell it. I don't know that the voting was even close, because when you compete with the Kelsey brothers, that's not going to be close. But we lost another award. I guess it was yesterday. Was announced. I didn't tell you guys, again, I didn't tell you guys that I nominated each of us individually. This is a single person award. I did nominate each of us. Had to send.
Did you just nominate yourself?
No, I said each of us. I did have to send headshots, and I may have used generative AI to adjust shirtless torso photos.
Enhance things.
Yes. Or minimize things. We lost my double chin mark. That's what I'm referring to. We lost out on the sexiest man alive for 2024.
Shoot.
Yeah.
Good old Johnny Krasinski won. And so funny story. There is a tie-in to Johnny Krasinski in this episode. So, but that's next. That's an interview coming up this episode. So let's get into it. Chris, you want to hit an advertiser real quick?
I do. I want to talk about Scale Computing. So Scale Computing, they are, I would say, new to me on the block of K-12 tech, getting into being a VMware alternative. They have a great solution. One of the neighboring schools by me has checked them out thoroughly, thinking about getting into them. They're basically wanting to take on your VMware, your Nutanix. They're good stuff. They work with a network of approved partners. They're going to support all your VMs. They want to move you over. They want to save you money. You can email northcentral at scalecomputing.com directly, or you can just pick the reseller of your choice. If you reference K12 Tech Pro or K12 Tech Talk podcast, that should hook you up a little bit. We'll post some links about how migration works with them, some specs just in general on that they're a good VMware alternative. So Scale Computing, check them out if you're thinking about ditching VMware.
And, I was in a chat today. Someone was still arguing with VMware over getting their support contract set up and their portal account set up. It's been since May. This guy's been fighting with this problem with VMware, and he's ready to ditch them. So I think Scale Computing can fill that gap of getting rid of Broadcom / VMware / they want to manufacture money off our backs. Check out Scale Computing. Mark, hit me with the news.
All right. It's actually all FCC E-rate stuff going on.
So
right
happy
now.
topics.
So, yeah. Well, so
very
the first
exciting.
We have been talking about the FCC pilot for months. We all
this one is exciting.
Yeah. We all talked about whether or not to apply and who's applying, and we've even talked about it at some of our conferences. Hey, who's applying? Well, we got the answers to that question. 2,700 districts.
Everyone.
Districts and libraries applied for a total of, drumroll please, $3.7 billion in funding requests.
We did it.
Billion with a B. It's funny that 2,700 number of people that applied, that strongly correlates with our listenership.
That's exactly it. Yeah,
1 to 1.
Yeah.
1 to 1.
Like everybody that listens applied.
Now here's the scary part.
I hope they approve my printers. They told me to get creative.
Well, maybe you got something to explain to Chris. So if you do the math, the total funding divided by the total number of people that applied, the average application was just under $1.4 million.
Golly.
So I'm very surprised. I mean, you can't think that many districts are applying for $1.4 million. And Chris's printers are barely scratching that surface. So
if he needs a printer to print off his cybersecurity alerts, that's justifiable.
It's a secure printer, by the way.
It's a secure printer, yes.
So, I mean, if you think about that, if you think the average request is 1.4 million and there's only 200 million, I mean, how many pilots, how many people are actually going to be accepted into this program? I'm going to be very interested to see the mixture of small versus large projects and what actually gets tested.
I think I only requested like 40 grand.
I'm not remembering what I was, but I would guess it to be more like that too.
Well, I mean, if you're doing small projects, then somebody out there is like, I'll just take all 200 million of it, please.
Yeah. Right. Forget you guys. I'll get creative.
Who is your favorite target, your favorite school district to complain about, Mark? That's probably them.
Yeah. So craziness. So $3.7 billion, Josh, your desire to send the need to the FCC, that has been met.
We tipped it.
Hey,
they have heard it.
We are movers and shakers. Everyone applied.
That's right. Next up, speaking of E-rates, E-rate is now in the Supreme Court, and we're starting to get a little bit of a hint of where things are going. Now, this is not the big one that we were thinking of. This is not about the E-rate constitutionality one. This is about a whistleblower case. To give you a very, very high-level summary of this one, the Supreme Court currently has a case. It's actually a couple of decades old, around whether or not E-rate funds constitute federal dollars. And so if there is any misusage of that, then it constitutes defrauding the government. Right now, there's been a question of whether or not if you are defrauded, or if there is maybe a service provider gone bad, are they just misusing funds, or are they actually usually misusing federal dollars? The reason that's so important is because if it is deemed to be federal dollars during the E-rate program, well, then any private citizen can actually start a lawsuit against that telecom or service provider. So means quite a lot for the efficacy of the E-rate program, but obviously there is a bigger case on the horizon that we're looking forward to, and that brings us to our third.
Let me just pipe in here a little bit. Let me talk about Verkada.
He's got to pay the bills, Mark.
Yeah. If E-rate's going to go away, we got to figure out something else. Verkada, a proud sponsor of the K-12 Tech Talk podcast. You can check out their cloud solutions. They can help out with your campus perimeter, your safety needs, your physical security devices. You can put those all under their one platform. It's going to help you speed up your response to things going on, your emergency responses when bad things are happening. And hopefully it's going to minimize some costs and help you out over time. Check out Verkada. Mention the K-12 Tech Talk podcast when you do.
All right, and our last story is around kind of a follow-up to our last episode where we talked about our predictions for the election. Well, now we're starting to get an idea as to who Trump is nominating for various cabinet positions, and we are starting to see indications of who he might appoint to the chair of the FCC. So there is a Republican commissioner in the FCC named Brendan Carr, who's rumored to be Trump's pick for FCC. So people are starting to obviously dive into, what are his opinions and approaches. And he does have a very strong belief that, we need to minimize the amount of funding that is taken out of taxpayers. And he really wants to put more of the onus on the service providers, the companies. He was a vocal opponent of the Wi-Fi for home changes in E-rate. He did not want E-rate funding being used for home hotspots. He felt like that was the emergency broadband benefit program. That was the purpose of that, and we should be keeping E-rate dollars in schools. But there is a lot of back and forth as to whether or not a Republican Congress and executive branch would support more funding. Should E-rate be deemed illegal by the Supreme Court? Will the Republicans support more federal funding? Or, and some of the other theories being brandished around right now is, will the FCC push this down onto the telecom companies and say, you guys take care of this? After all, they do benefit from the E-rate program themselves. So really, really going to be interesting in the next few weeks. I will say the universal thought, though, is that both Democrats and Republicans will push for the next iteration of E-rate. In fact, there are some numbers too that more E-rate funds go to Republican districts than Democratic districts. So the Republicans have a desire to keep E-rate in schools or in libraries. The question is just how. So that's the Washington news. That's it for the week.
A little bit to augment some of that, Mark. The big Supreme Court case about fee versus tax.
Yep.
Was also in that article. And just a quick summary, we know the details. The argument is it a fee or a tax? They're saying that the Supreme Court's likely to grant cert for that in November with expectation of briefs potentially due in January.
Yeah.
And that would point to a decision likely before the end of the Supreme Court term of June 30, 2025.
Yep.
So I was talking with my boss this afternoon about this, and we were wondering, okay, if there's a decision before the end of term, what does that mean for the start of the next E-rate year, July 1, 2025? Like
Correct.
where will it's going to be an interesting 6-9 months here. I think right now my stance is full steam ahead on my 470s next month. But when we issue 471s, there's going to be some language in that 471 that says, look, we're not doing anything unless we have a guaranteed FCDL.
Yep.
Just, if you're issuing a 471, you're going to need to take precautions to protect yourself in case that funding gets yanked out from underneath you.
I've seen a couple other theories too around that in terms of, will there be should E-rate, again, worst case scenario, should E-rate be deemed unconstitutional? Will there be an off-ramp period where at least the FCC, their funds are there for another year? So should, going by your timeline, Josh, decision comes in June, July, there is at least funding. There's money in the piggy bank to go through another year. And that obviously is not going to interrupt schools. I don't think anybody's going to want to interrupt schools. That's the most politically unfriendly thing you can do. So everybody from the Supreme Court down will be looking for a solution, at least to give us an off-ramp.
So many comments.
That reminds me of when that time period happened of, hey, E-rate's no longer going to do your phone lines.
Right.
Like they were moving on from this.
Yep. That was a 5-year transition.
It was. Yeah.
And it was a real deal with local money. Like, hey, here's these new bills that we're used to it being whatever, 80% off or whatever percent off. Like, we have to figure out how to do this now. Surely our government would think about that.
I think it's also interesting
that my government
coincides. We got fresh eyes, Mark. It coincides with this coming cycle. This next year's cycle is the 5th year of the current E-rate cycle. So,
which is interesting timing too.
Exactly. If you've got dollars out there, spend them like they're going out of style. Of course, only on eligible items. We're not lawyers. Whatever. Mark's got the thing at the end of the episode.
I was just pulling up the old FCC chairman video when he made that crazy video, the things you can still do on the internet after net neutrality. Do you remember that video?
Yeah.
You need to go watch it again.
We're going to link that in the notes.
The thumbnail, he's like in a Santa Claus suit with sunglasses on.
I think so this article that we're referencing is from the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, SHLB. We'll link that in the show notes as well. I sent this off to my superintendent. It's been a discussion item over on K-12 Tech Pro today. So it's worth the read to at least be aware of what's going on and have some finer detail to be able to have intelligent conversations and informed conversations.
And I don't think, going back to your point, Josh, around like, well, what kind of conversation are you having with your superintendent? I don't think it's worth creating panic right now.
No,
I don't think that's at all healthy, but it is worth making sure that your superintendent, your budget person, your financial officer, making sure that they're aware that a huge amount of money is currently being debated right now. And so there could be a funding cliff for K-12 technology that has to be, and this is the important part, it has to be taken care of. Your internet is going to go down. Many, many school districts will go dark without that funding. And so people just have to be aware. They don't need to panic yet, but you need to be aware that, hey, there's some stuff going on.
If you want to panic, it's fine. Panic gets me out of the bed in the morning. It's fine.
This to me is the easy stuff. When you get the article, this is what I do. I give that to my boss.
Yeah.
Okay, here's just an article, keeping you in the loop, and hopefully it brings up little sidebar conversations every once in a while. So if the bad thing does happen, there's some recollection of the articles and the small conversations that built up to the big bad thing that happened.
Yep.
Totally.
We need to introduce our interview. So we got to interview. Well, let me say how it ties in with Johnny Krasinski. So one of the things that he is known for is playing an NSA spy on that Prime show, Jack Ryan, and we got to interview a former NSA agent this week. Tony Sager, who is an employee of the Center for Internet Security, who also is a partner of the MSISAC. It was interesting to talk to Tony. We talked to him for almost 45 minutes?
Yeah, it was a good time.
He gave us some background into CIS, how they were formed, how he was around and watching the internet be born back in the late 80s, early 90s situation, and how cybersecurity has morphed and changed over the last 30 plus years. It's a good interview.
And we want to thank our sponsors for that, and we're going to jump into this thing. So VIZOR, been hanging out with us all year, VIZOR. Check out vizor.cloud/K12 Tech Talk. They can do your device management. And then ManagedMethods, they can watch your stuff, watch your Google, watch your Microsoft, see what files are being shared out, and see what content is in those files. And then Fortinet podcast at Fortinet.com. Our friends over there, check out Fortinet for all your Forti needs, in particular a FortiGate, their firewall solution. And last but not least is Extreme. Email our friend Dominic D. Mayer at extremenetworks.com for your networking stuff. This is a great interview. We hope you enjoy it.
And shoot us an email, k12techtalk@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
All right. This is our interview with Tony Sager. I'm going to make a very abbreviated intro to allow him to introduce himself. He is joining us from the CIS organization. So tell us about CIS, the organization you're with, and your background and what got you there.
Well, I'm one of the longest serving, oldest cyber guys you're going to run into, I think, in cyber defense. I started in 1977 at the National Security Agency. So I'm at 47 years, and
wow,
I've lost count. And back then we called it communications security, or ComSec. But I had no idea what I was getting into. I wish I could have told you I did, but I wound up at NSA kind of by accident. I thought it was like NASA, where they made rockets and stuff. But it turned out it was really different. And, I was a young undergrad mathematics, and it turned out to be that was like the perfect place for a young mathematician. NSA was the center of the gravity on things like cryptography and randomization and key management and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of in-house knowledge. And I started, whenever you think of NSA, you probably think of an intelligence agency and spying on people. And that's true. It's probably 90% of it. But there's a lonely little 10% that works in defense. And that's where I started and never left.
Very cool.
But within there, I was one of the vulnerability finders for defense, one of the first, what they called software vulnerability analysts. So after my internship, I called it staring at other people's software for a living, looking for 0 days flaws in protocols, the mathematics, the implementations, and all that kind of stuff. And I switched my focus.
You were primarily focused on like working in a bunker with a green screen and a hood up around your back. You're the one that got us the visual of the
absolutely. Yeah, well, the commuting by black helicopter thing was like the highlight, I have to admit. No, yeah, we love the better story that you get in the popular media, but frankly, it was just a room full of nerdy wonks, like me. I mean, I'm serious. Some of the most amazing, smart, and frankly unconventional people you could ever imagine, surrounded by them, brilliant and. But maybe not necessarily socially elegant, we'll just say.
Sure. So how did you end up at CIS?
Well, I had 35 years at NSA, and again, very unusual. All of it in what we now call cybersecurity and cyber defense. And I described my career in 3 phases, real quick. First third was learning the technical craft of how systems can break or can be manipulated to break. The middle third, I moved into management. So I got to see flaws happen at really large scale. So that was one of the beauties of being at NSA. You are literally in the middle of the nation state fight every moment of every day.
Yeah.
So watching how we attack other countries, how they attack us, how they attack each other. And so, by the time we hit the middle of my career, everyone who was technically competent was being cross-trained in both offense and defense. So it's a really fascinating place. I call it grad school every day in cyber defense. But that middle third, and remember the times, the 80s, 90s, a lot of this information was not that well known. So when the early days of red teaming happened in my time, where we would say, oh, here's an operational live vulnerability in the DoD system. We couldn't possibly tell anybody about that. And it turned out we did such a good job of protecting it, we didn't tell enough people on the defensive side what to do about it. I said at some point the bad guys know, right? They know what technology we use. They know what we're connected to. They know how we do things and who talks to who. And so, but it went from this sort of closed society. So I got to see, thanks to I assume you both are U.S. taxpayers. Thanks to the generosity of the U.S. taxpayer. I got this incredible education and view of all these flaws, what nations were doing to each other, et cetera. And then the last third of my career conceptually was like, what are we doing wrong in this country? We're finding the same problems over and over again, like for decades, right? Missing patches and bad configurations and poor privilege management, sort of basic stuff. So I started to think about that. Meanwhile, and I retired from NSA in 2012, but in 2000, the Center for Internet Security was founded by a fellow named Alan Paller, the founder of the SANS Institute. And the idea there was an NSA or a Defense Department or a NIST could gather a bunch of experts and figure out what to do, right? What is the best practice for this kind of defense? But what about the rest of the nation? What about the rest of the economy? So the notion of CIS was, could I do this in a different way by gathering volunteers and experts from across the community, create content, and essentially give it away, but support it as a nonprofit, right? Have a company that really managed the activity. And that was really the founding of CIS. And I got to meet employee number one at CIS when there was only one employee. I was still at NSA in 2000, and we got introduced to this through this fellow Alan. And the idea was partnership between us, because no matter how big and bad an NSA is or a DoD, it's not big enough. You can't keep up with all the technologies and all the flaws and all the practices. And so it turned out, by working with a nonprofit, this is how I convinced my bosses, by working with a nonprofit, we could produce more and better content, like about good configurations for Windows desktops or mail servers or web servers, than either of us could do by ourselves. And we got this sort of built-in constituency, right? Lots of people working together. And it would also become then attractive for the commercial marketplace to deliver tools, right? That volume says, oh, a lot of people are choosing to behave this way. I want a piece of that, but with support tools or measurement or reporting or whatever. So I was always kind of lined up with CIS, philosophically. But when in 2012, I wound up leaving NSA, retiring. And I needed, for family reasons, I was looking to work from home in 2012 for mostly elder care, I'll say, and looking for something non-traditional to do, not the regular defense contractor route. And so I wound up at SANS with the SANS Institute, the biggest teacher of cybersecurity in the industry, for a little bit. Took a project. It turned out I was part of the origin of this project from NSA. I gathered a group of people to write a 2-page letter. I said, one thing I'm seeing out there is that people are struggling, not because of the lack of resources, but there's too many. And we need to cut this down. The discipline is about fewer things, not more things. No one does what's in the NIST 800-53 catalog, if you know what that
right.
is. And no one expects you to either.
Right.
You're expected to execute some really complex risk management framework and wisely choose from the catalog and manage to that. And my experience was not a lot of federal agencies could even handle that part of the job.
Interesting.
And so the discipline was, look, if we're all connected together using essentially the same technology on the same network, and bad guys, on any given day in cybersecurity, right, you might be the victim, but you're just as likely the jump point or an innocent bystander or a contributor to an attack. It's not about you. You're just part of the attack infrastructure now. And so the bad news is one bad thing cascades across a lot of us. The good news is that's an opportunity for collective action. Wow, we don't have to solve this problem individually. We could put our heads together. That's kind of philosophically the core of CIS. So I wound up, starting up a little tiny nonprofit that was the home of this thing we now call the CIS Critical Security Controls, and wound up merging into CIS, the Center for Internet Security, in 2015. So that brought together what today's CIS, which is the company was founded on security benchmarks. How to take individual pieces of IT and configure them the best. The next piece that was added was the multi-state ISAC. So we are responsible for, I think, 18,000 now state, local, tribal, territorial governments as a kind of central watch center and best practice and advice. And then I brought in the last piece after I retired in 2015, which was the controls, kind of the next level up in abstraction, right? You could configure well, but how do I put it how do I manage the system overall, from start to finish? So this, as a federal employee who's worked in cyber defense for forever, CIS is like the perfect second stage for me.
Sure.
This sort of large scale volunteerism. I've gone from giant government agency, big budget, to, convincing people to work together, which I really love as a management challenge. And you guys know, right? This industry is full of amazing people who, if you just give them the right excuse, they love to work together.
Yeah.
But you got to create the right moment, the right thing and support it. And you can't let it descend into the chaos of, infinite catalogs of things to do. Or the endless discussion groups, which I know you guys have been a part of, right? We love to talk in this industry, right? About, complicated things and technology and clever attackers and nation states and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you got to translate it into a small number of positive, constructive things that people can do. So long story, but that's why I'm at CIS. It just lines up with my life and, what I've cared about and what I think I could bring to this.
Absolutely fascinating to me to think that you were in, the NSA, seeing that early stage internet from the 80s and 90s, when it's making that transition from DARPA to the public web. I remember being in high school, and I was a senior in high school in the late 90s thinking, holy cow, this internet thing is amazing. And it was really just, there wasn't much there yet compared to what's there now. It was just, that would have been fascinating to see.
No question that. Yeah. And I was, by the way, as a big government guy, I was fascinated by this.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, this stuff is all like public and everything's connected. And, there's a talk I used to give. The title is something like, I'm a reformed government monopolist. Right? Because before then, if you were going to be involved in security, basically it was a government monopoly. Right?
Sure.
The government paid the freight, had the big bags of money, set the requirements. You had to be a cleared defense contractor, all that kind of stuff. And then, like you said, mid-90s and on, man, we're all in this. How fascinating. But it's also, you can't operate like you would as a monopoly. Right. You can't say, no, only, big vendor, IT vendor, I won't name them. You only can use cleared, DoD cleared contractors to write the software we're going to buy from you. That's laughable, right? That would never have happened. And so we had to learn to operate in this, really chaotic, frankly, marketplace of exciting new technology. Yeah. But you can't act the way you would have done. That was the revelation for me to see, okay, how do we behave differently then and still, secure the DoD and the intelligence community, et cetera.
So how do you wrangle this chaos, this controlled chaos then, and distill it down to how it affects K-12? I know K-12 is a huge membership of the MSISAC and what you guys do at CIS. A good portion of it, a lot of it, goes directly into K-12, helping them secure themselves. What would you say some of that chaos, what do we need to be paying attention to as far as threats go in the K-12 environment?
No, that's a great question, because that's the classic example, right? You'll hear people use terms like cyber poverty line or cyber underserved and things like that. And with all respect, I mean, amazing people came up with, I won't name, but the cyber poverty line. I get it, but I never use that term because I think it's wrong. Right? It implies that if we just threw more money at the problem, we could solve it. That's not true. We threw money at K-12, bless their hearts. The next dollar is not going to be spent on a cybersecurity person, right, or an expensive tool. That's I like cyber underserved, and we use that at CIS more because what I think we see is fundamental market failure. We have successfully created a model of security that most of our economy cannot execute. That's an editorial comment, by the way. But the idea was, what's the traditional model? You've got a business, you go buy a bunch of IT, you go get some security guidance, you download frameworks and then you kind of build it yourself. And guess what? Most of the K-12s and lots of folks that they don't have anyone who's going to read all that. No. They're not subscribing to daily threat feeds, and it's out of their reach. It makes no sense. It's not because they're bad people. I want them focused on teaching my kids and dealing with my medical issues and all that kind of stuff. So the model is fundamentally wrong. So when I talk about CIS, I often use the word translate. I said the verb that matters in cybersecurity. We often say, especially the DC area, share. If we all just shared all we knew about bad guys and threats and we shared everything, we'll all be really smart and we'll know what to do, right? I haven't seen that yet in my lifetime. It might work for the well-funded, right, people who can afford a room full of wonks who can make sense of all this. But that doesn't work for the rest of us. The real verb that matters is how do I take millions of data points of bad stuff, right, that most of us can't read because we don't have access to it or the background, and translate that into a small number of positive, constructive things that you can do about it. Think of the CIS benchmarks and the controls as the output of a translation.
Sure.
That's what matters. And the good news is you don't have to do it by yourself, right? We can do it as a community, certainly at the 80, 90% level. Yes, we've the other great flaw in our business is we treat everybody as special snowflakes. That's a K through 12. You're a special snowflake. And might be true for my kids,
sure,
but not
sure.
in cyberspace. Yes, everybody is unique, budget, appetite of the risk appetite of the manager. Yeah, that's true. But if you start from there, then everyone has to solve the problem by themselves. And then you add it all up. Oh, now I can decide, is this school system safe or not? That's completely backwards. Again, we operate from a fundamental principle. We all have more in common than different. So it's certainly if you like the 80-20 rule or Pareto principle, we have more in common. Therefore, we should work together, right? The same content, the same practices at a base level, at a foundational level, we can argue what they are, is important to help everybody get there, whether they realize it or not.
Right.
Whether they can afford a threat assessment or can subscribe to it doesn't matter. You're on the internet using commodity stuff. You're connected to business suppliers and all kinds of people in ways you don't even understand until something goes wrong. So you ought to focus on the commonality up front. And then, by the way, that will give you so much value. You're still a target, but you're now not a sitting duck anymore, wide open, getting eaten alive and paralyzed. So this translation is a thing that really matters, and we try to simplify that down, right? And that's the purpose of, the sort of fundamental role of a CIS is to have the discipline and the processes to say, people can't deal with 1,000 things, but they can deal with 10, right? Or 20, or a small number. And can we identify rationally, reasonably, the thing that everyone should do? And we have done it the traditional way. Here's one of the unspoken secrets of the industry, by the way. Where do all these frameworks and stuff come from? And the recommendation lists and all that stuff. They put a bunch of nerds in a room and we argue until we can't stand each other anymore. We write it down.
Right.
And by the way, these are like amazing people. It's great. Yeah. We're capturing judgment, right? You'd politely say, we're capturing the experience and judgment of these people. But, you could easily pick a different set of 5 or 10 people and get a different answer.
Sure.
And you can't keep up like that, right? So we have done as much, I think, as anybody in the industry. Remember, I'm a math wonk by training, to work with folks like the Verizon data breach people and Palo Alto and CrowdStrike, right? We don't want all their data. That data is like crazy complicated. They have brilliant data scientists, but all of them produce some kind of annual or quarterly summary of the most frequent attacks, the ones that cause the most damage. And what we try to do is pull the group together to look at that, translate it into what are the smallest number of things that will provide the most value. We use some intermediate steps, if you know what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is, right? We got a lot of wonky stuff under the hood to make that rigorous. But the idea there is if you want to know why we recommend this, right? What I wanted to be able to say is anything we recommend, we can describe to you what we think the security value of that step is. Most of our industry is full of good things to do. Well, if the moon and stars line up this way and the attackers are angry and this might happen. Well, yeah, but did it happen? How much should I worry about it?
Right.
You can go the probabilistic route, or you can do what we've done, sort of modeling route. And again, it's not perfect, but it's the best we know how to do at CIS. And so if you want all that, we do all that. We publish it, we give it to you, right? This is transparency, right? We want you to have confidence.
Yeah.
It's not like a room full of wonks or the NSA guy said this or whoever. We want you to be able to say, and by the way, if you have better data that's more unique to you or your sector of the economy, you don't have to start from scratch. Take our model. You can build upon what we've said and say, but I want to fine tune it because in this educational sector, we actually have pretty good data on the kinds of attacks that we really worry about. And maybe that would change your priorities. Great. We'll help you do it if you want to, right? But we think there's a need for this kind of transparency because at the end of the day, that poor administrator is going to have to explain to his boss, like, why did you do this? Or explain to the auditor or,
So that's Tony, I sat through a session at the conference this last year in Orlando about reasonable security. And that seems like it's going to be a buzz phrase or a buzzword that kind of takes off here. I know today CIS and MSISEC are doing a webinar on reasonable security steps. To me, that goes hand in hand with the CIS critical controls, right? Like IG1, IG2, those types of controls.
Exactly
so
right.
Can you give us a brief overview of defining reasonable security and what that looks like or what that means.
Sure. Yeah, I think we've seen this shift over the last several years. And, again, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? Remember, there was a notion that we were going to build security, but we treated it primarily as a technology problem. Math wonks, and NSA was the home of them, and there was a thing called the National Computer Security Center, and some of your listeners, I'm sure, will know the terms Orange Book or Rainbow Book. These were the formal structures, right? I mean, brilliant minds that created this sort of notion of what would security look like, and could I assert, is the verb, mathematical properties about it. This kind of data could never be accessed by this kind of user, and that sort of thing. And they set the foundations for what we call classical computer security in the day. So that's great. The problem is, basically, it didn't run PowerPoint. And right, this thing you talked about, Josh, the emergence of the internet. We went from the government drives IT, right, research bags of money from the big think tanks and to the think tanks and these big idea things, to consumers drove IT. Right, it's whatever Microsoft ships and Apple is doing, and whatever Google says. I need that now. I didn't know I needed it last week, but now that they've announced it, I know I need it. Right? They're not waiting for security people to tell them it's safe.
Right.
So that's part of the monopoly shift to say, wait a minute, this stuff is coming out, and the standard saying among my vendor friends was second to market is last to market.
Sure. Yeah.
And which means, right, hey, you people will pay to get beta versions of our software. Right. We're shipping out. We know it's buggy, but hey, it's got the capability. It basically works. We'll fix it in the next rev, the next patch, the next hotfix.
Yeah.
And we just became accustomed to that. And so you don't get the luxury of kind of waiting for all this to happen, at a later time. So there's never going to be this magical state of security. Right. By the way, we don't get perfection in public health either, or in safety. Transportation. If you fly in a commercial airplane, things can happen.
Yeah.
But we do manage most of the risk in the infrastructure. You do not have to become an expert on, how pilots are trained or the building of a commercial aircraft. Maybe it's not a great example given the recent news, but the assumption is, and it's a reasonable socialist.
You're not helping my anxiety about flying.
Sorry about that. I got to tell you a story. You ready for a story?
Sure.
So in the mid 90s, I went out to the FAA to give a talk on, heaven help me, business process reengineering, because I was doing that kind of stuff at NSA. And we got to talk, hey, what do you do for a day job? Well, I'm running this system and network attack center. And we figure out the flaws, and attack things 0 days to help the fix. He goes, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. He said, well, we're not actually worried about the security, in this mid-90s, of the air traffic control system. I said, well, why not? He says, well, our systems are so old, no one knows the commands for them anymore. No one knows how to hack them. I said, I'm glad I drove out here. Oh, my God. I mean, okay. They've come a long way since then. Let me just say,
sure.
Be confident. But this idea of we manage most of risk through infrastructure, right? We try to build it into building the equivalent of building codes and the licensing of people and the strength of materials and all that kind of stuff. Cyber is messy, though. I don't say it's entirely different, but it's messy because there's so many variables, and a lot of them are not easily measured, like the strength of nuts and bolts and the welding and things that we wish we had rules for. We don't. So this idea of, so what is it that we should expect as social creatures in terms of managing risk? Well, most of it has to be built in. And so the reasonable part is like a magic word in law and regulation.
Sure.
I'm not a lawyer, but because we are the multi-state ISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center, we deal every day with, literally thousands and thousands of state and local governments. And, while Washington, struggles to reach consensus, how was that politely said?
Sure.
States are like closer to the problem, right? It's their businesses,
right?
It's their citizens that are being, picked clean, and so they feel more compelled to do things, to be specific, and they often are not in a position to say we're going to regulate the heck out of this in this state, right? So they have to find compromise, and that's been our experience. So you get things like states, and for us, the key partner and the pioneer in this was Ohio, the Ohio Data Protection Act, where they offer some kind of safe harbor. Hey, if you choose to invest in security controls and have a documented program based upon publicly known things like the NIST cybersecurity framework, the NIST, the CIS controls, Then in the event of a breach, or for the business that you're doing in our state, holding our citizens' data, then you get some sort of safe harbor, right? Protection from liability. In other states, it might be a cap on punitive damages or no punitive damages. But the idea was to build this instead of, yes or no, secure or not, this notion of can I, and what's defined in there, that magic word is used, reasonable.
Right.
So as a math walk, it makes you a little crazy. Well,
Sure.
Okay, where's the definition of reasonable?
Right.
Oh, it's not in there.
Right.
Well, by design, it's not in there. It's left to kind of figure out, right? To establish through precedent, through regulatory action, et cetera. So we've been working with a number of states on that. And what we decided to do, and we have a number of states that have some sort of very specific cyber legislation that uses that word in there. You're going to have to somehow demonstrate reasonable practice, or you have a reasonable program or something like that. There are even more states, probably triple the number, that have something like that in privacy legislation. Because privacy is sort of a hot topic,
right.
And all that. You have to do something. But those are, you might think of them as de facto cyber legislation, because whatever data you're lawfully allowed to collect has to be protected, right? So you have to make the case that I've used reasonable practice of some type. So for us, that's all part of a package of ideas here. So it's, in some sense, it was left to the reader to define. So we don't get to define it either. But what we are allowed to do at CIS, or what we can do, is to say, based upon our knowledge of attacks and security frameworks and controls, how would we interpret this good, well-intended activity by the states? So we put together a working group, which included a judge, multiple lawyers who've worked both prosecution as well as defense, a law professor out of Ohio, the Ohio cyber advisor to the state of Ohio, to craft the paper that you've probably seen released, that we released at RSA in 2024. And the idea was, we've looked at all this. This is what we think is a rational way to approach reasonableness in a very specific way, given, again, knowledge of control frameworks, right? At the end of the day, someone's going to implement this in technology. And so this is our interpretation of the way to think about it. So that's been a major thought leadership campaign for us at CIS for this year. It's spilling well over into 2025. I've already scheduled a few events. As you mentioned, I'm doing another webcast today on the topic. And the idea there is, again, there's no one answer here, but in the name of social sanity, we absolutely need some way to encourage better behavior, right? And demonstrably better behavior, right? It's not just do good, it's do good in a specific way that can be measured, talked about, reported on, is supported by industry tools. All those things really matter. And, so when we talk about the controls and the benchmarks, for example, there's a tagline we use internally. It's not just about the list, right? There's a great list of things to do on every street corner in this industry, right? There's great NIST documents. There's great documents. Every cybersecurity month, every year, there's going to be a list of top 10 things to do, top 5 of this, top 20 of that. But, what we've tried to do is build the ecosystem around the list, the training, the tools, the public policy support. That's what the reasonable campaign is about for us, is connecting the sort of attack world, the technology implementation, with public policy, right? Public policy people have important job to do for us all, right? To try and bring order, to encourage business activity, to protect their citizens. And so they're in the cyber business, whether they know it or not. And so they have goals. And so the idea here is to link together their good responsibility, their important things they're trying to do, with technology and recommendations, cybersecurity action that has real value, right? That's kind of the notion behind it. Just kind of I know it's a bit complicated, but it's a story whose time has come, right? Cyber goes from, hey, if you wonks would just invent the, Binford 9000 formally verified operating system, then we could all be safe and sleep at night. That's not going to happen. We're going to have to manage this risk like we do with other things, but we need to do it some sort of controlled way. And so we're doing our best at CIS to kind of pull this story together that intersects, again, technology with public policy.
So can I ask, specifically to our audience, we have a lot of people who listen who are technology directors, who are who are praising everything you guys are doing, and everything, the CIS controls are amazing. If only we could get this done in K-12, right? And I wonder, from your perspective at CIS, what are the major points of resistance you start to see when it comes to implementing the CIS controls, the IG1, IG2,
Mm-hmm.
either specifically in K-12 or in other sectors?
Yeah, I'd say so. Lots of people, say really nice things, and we appreciate it about CIS, but they still struggle, right? Because and it's a lot of this is about getting started. And getting started is more complicated than one might imagine. So there's a talk I give. I call it the Defender's Dilemma. Are you ready? 3 parts to the Defender's Dilemma. You got to figure out the right thing to do, right? Which means you got to understand your IT, your dependencies, the business goals, right? What are you trying to achieve with the IT? You're not running IT to run IT. You're trying to achieve something, and you got to pull all that, and you've got to pull all that together in some coherent way. Figure out what to do. And that's hard. And again, we try to do that for you. I gave the story of how we scan all those threat reports, work with the leading threat intelligence vendors, et cetera, to make sense of it. And then you're going to have to do it, which means convince a boss to get a budget, scour the marketplace, buy stuff, train people, operationalize the tools in your environment, and so forth. And people get stumped there too, because it can be complicated. And that's what I meant by this ecosystem. We provide a lot of those materials for you there also. And then the third part of the Defender's Dilemma is the worst of all. This is what I call the great self-inflicted wound of the industry. You have to prove to multiple parties over and over again that you've done the right thing from their perspective.
Yes.
So the auditor, the boss, right, the regulator, the judge and the lawyer. And by the way, none of them speaks the same language.
And the end user, Tony.
And the end user. Yes,
the biggest
exactly.
conversations that I've had, when we implemented MFA was discussions with the end user about the why.
Yeah.
I get it.
Right. So all that. So we have tried to do a couple things, right? Just to even that implementation group 1, I think one of you referenced here, right? So even our control, the CI's critical security controls, relative to almost anything else that you see out there, it's already trimmed way down. Right. The idea was not to give you the list of all possible things, but from our perspective, the most important things. We found that was still a bit much for folks. So we reframed it, I think, starting with version 8 around the implementation groups. And the idea was an on-ramp. How about folks who have really no resources, very little to work with, to get started? That has been that was what really got us attention in lots of audiences, in particular K through 12.
Yeah.
Because that was like, okay, I get it. That's at least a small enough starting point that gets us going. And even that, though, and so we've now done a series of things. We're working with a number of folks to develop specialized training at rational cost for just the implementation group 1 start of it. So there's a fair amount that we're doing to both provide complementary materials, but also make them available, right, in low cost ways, because that's the lowest, most resource sensitive part of the marketplace there. The other thing we're doing is we're moving up the service stack. So for a lot of folks, they wind up outsourcing their IT to some managed service provider, or they consolidate it, say, at a county level or some other level, right? So that you don't really want to focus on, in those circumstances, you don't want to focus on the end enterprise. You want to focus on the service provider. And if you check out what we've been doing with managed service providers, we have a pretty big footprint now with folks who are using the controls and benchmarks, but kind of behind the scenes to support the end users there. And this is one of those, where the economics were out of whack in this industry. Because I live in a rural county. My doctor's a one-man practice, lawyer, one-man, dentist, 2 chairs, no waiting, that very small. They don't have IT people. There's somebody that drives around and patches up their systems every once in a while. Right. So I got to know some of the local service providers. Hey, do you guys, what do you think about this cyber thing? Do customers ask for it? Do you provide it? Most of them, a few of them are really good at it because they've thought about it. But most say, no one's willing to pay me for it. Or they give me vague things like, I need more security. Could you give me some of that? What does that mean? Well, that doesn't mean anything, right? So there's no demand. Why would I hire a security guy? Why would I tighten up my configurations? So in that case, CIS shifts to a role as kind of the go-between in supply and demand, right? So part of having things like benchmarks and IG1 is you create a language of demand. Instead of saying to the service provider, give me better security, you say, all the desktops that you're going to provide for me, I want them set up the way CIS says to set up a Windows desktop. Okay, you create a specific language And now the vendor could look at that and say, I want to compete for their business. How do I provide my tools in a way that so you train the buyers, right, with a language. You have to have a language to demand it. That creates the incentive for someone else to invest in it, right, to come to us or to other, to service security tool provider, to go to the cloud providers. A lot of those folks are acting as go-betweens, right, between the end user and Amazon or Azure or something like that. And so you can create this language that allows people, again, you want the market to solve this. You don't want, in our wildest dreams, it doesn't make sense. We don't want everyone to come to CIS and download stuff and read it. That's too inefficient. And most people aren't able to do that. We'd much rather they go to the service provider and say, give me £1.50 of that CIS thing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's scalable, sellable. And again, you want to encourage that through public policy. So trying to tie all those together. I mean, this isn't a crisp, easy answer, but we're very conscious of trying to work this as a supply and demand thing. Like the whole reasonable thing is about demand, right? That is why would people choose to do this? Well, because they see an economic incentive for it. Why would a service provider choose to improve their tools, right? And spend money to do that? Because they think they can sell it better. So all that's kind of part of the swirl of things that we're trying to do here. But, for those that are really struggling, again, we a huge part of the adopter base for CIS stuff is folks who don't have anywhere else to go, frankly.
Yeah.
Right. They need us. They're not going to read a massive government document. So we are very conscious of what we can do to make things really accessible, to write them in a way that's the cleanest, simplest. When we write our guidance, for example, I don't know if you notice this, but this started, I think, with version 7. When I say my guidance to the team was this, we use internal slang to shortcut this stuff. One ASK per safeguard. So a safeguard, we have the 18 top level controls. Safeguards are the thing beneath them. We try to be disciplined to say when we make a recommendation, ask for only one thing in that recommendation. That sounds so simple-minded, but go try to read some of these more complicated NIST documents. I'm sorry,
sure, right.
On NIST, but you know what I mean. And a lot of this stuff is like read prose, right? Read and then you figure out what to do because you're a special snowflake. So, should I do 2 things or 4 things? We say one thing, then you can say, is there a measurement for it? Is there a tool for it? Because what's going to happen? People are going to, if they like our stuff, they're going to say, I'm going to take their stuff, I'm going to plug it into Excel. Right, the universal cybersecurity tool. I'm going to assign a person to it. Or they're going to buy a GRC tool if they're that, if they're really into that kind of stuff. But I said we're not writing stone tablets here. We're creating we're starting workflow. That's the way we view our work. We are creating workflow, the input to your workflow. Therefore, we want to make it as simple as possible, the least amount of room for interpretation, and the next auditor that comes in doesn't like your interpretation. So it says something. We want to make that simple as we can because we know what we think we know what you're going to do with it. And we want to make that easy for you. I'm sorry, go ahead, Pastor.
I will say to the defense of the work that you've done with the critical controls and the implementation groups, I know a tech director at a very, very, very rural school district in Missouri, southern Missouri, one-man show, small school district. He has implemented IG1 and 2 with great success in his district and followed the implementation, the IG1 plans, and I think used the CSAT tool from you guys to help check the things off the list and get everything done. He could give a presentation on implementing this. It's so the fact that your team has been able to distill those recommendations down to a very manageable, very I won't say easy because some of the things are difficult to do, like getting your arms around your inventory, but very actionable items that you can say, yes, now I have a device inventory of my network. Now, we're requiring these different things. Kudos to the team because a one-man show can do it.
So number one, I need to get the person's name if we don't already know him through the ISAC. But that's exactly the point, right? Now, is it easy? No. If it was easy, we'd all be out of work. But I think there's something important there in this lesson that we can do it. And again, once you find a few lessons, one other role we play is clearinghouse. Right? Can we find that person? What is it? that we can do to scale that, to make that story available. Is it resources? Is it context? Is it just lack of information? Do you need the one go-getter?
Right.
I've been around the security business a long time. A lot of work here comes down to there's one person that's just so determined. They make it happen, and they're able to sell the boss. But what can we do? This is what drives our strategy. What can we do to make that person a hero? To replicate that story, right?
Sure.
To remove the barrier for the next person.
Sure.
Is it the convincing the boss thing? Is it just the seed money to get going? And by the way, again, it's a nonprofit. One of the things I do for the company is help run a grants program. We've been successful enough that we've helped, seed some of the work that's going on out there. Because again, we're a nonprofit, so we don't have any shareholders. We're just trying to do good things here. So if we can take those stories and amplify them, to figure out how to scale them. One of the models that I use, I'll divert slightly off the tree here, is we make a claim, right? We used to use the tagline, making best practice common practice. Well, I've said this in many talks I've given. When we say anybody in this industry who says best practices, you need to challenge them. Right? Because people throw that around. By the way, for such a high techno field here, we use words pretty loosely. We say vulnerabilities, threats, and attacks like they're all the same thing. They're not the same thing. But best practices, what does that mean? Well, people will say this. Well, the problem with the cyber stuff is we need better hygiene out there. For example, patching. For example, better privilege management. But examples are not enough to build a campaign, right? Because they're just examples. If you don't define it, which we have done, that's what IG1 was, essential cyber hygiene. So if you don't have a definition, you can't say, well, am I making progress towards achieving hygiene? Have I gotten there yet, right? What are the measurements I would associate with it? So we try to be disciplined about that part of it too, so that we think, and that's why we defined it, to bring everyone up to a foundational level. But the analogy I use, which is not a very good one, I'll tell you guys anyway. So you're old enough to remember only you can prevent forest fires.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Smokey the Bear. I mean, one of the greatest advertising campaigns. But so it's got your attention. What am I supposed to do? I didn't say. Smokey didn't say. But I was also a Boy Scout, right? A Boy Scout. There was actually, I think it's a 4 or 5 step process to safely extinguish your campfire.
Sure.
Get a bucket of water, let things down, stir, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's prescriptive. That's what we're aiming for, right? So you have your attention with the only you can prevent forest fires. But what should I do about it? You've got my attention now. What am I going to do about it? That's where we try to operate, right? To honor the good intention, but to say, but now can I help people, with the specifics of what to do?
I think to get people's attention, Tony, you just need a cartoon bear. That's what we learned from Smokey the Bear. We just need an animated bear to get everybody's attention. I think
I have to make one correction, and this is just because my wife and I just had this conversation this weekend. It is not Smokey the Bear.
Oh, Smokey. Sorry, you're right.
It's Smokey Bear.
Yeah, yep. I stand corrected.
Excuse me.
There is no. We just happen to have this discussion.
Absolutely. No, you are correct.
But going off of that same analogy, one of the things if you think about fire safety, the really interesting thing that fire departments did years ago was they realized we can't get to parents. We're going to go through kids, and so they started to do school in classroom fire training. Right? Do you have a fire evacuation plan? And the kids went home and they built that out with their parents, and they got that behavior to change. Where do you see that similar mentality in K-12 education right now? Right? Are we going to continue to go after kids and then hope that, by kids I mean like our tech directors, are going to make that change, or is there a much bigger change that needs to happen? That kids are going home and saying to parents, "We got to have fire extinguishers," and they say, "No, never mind, we don't need it." We're feeling that same heat from tech directors who are saying, my principals don't care about MFA, our superintendents don't care about MFA. Where is that kind of stick approach, the carrot and the stick, to force these kinds of things to happen in K-12?
And I spoke at some educational conference. I was getting that same story, that exact same story, right? Which is the principal doesn't care,
right?
But we can't solve it sort of purely from the bottom up by educating the kids. And my kids, I raised 3 digital natives, right? And they're all, in the range of 40 years old. Their expectations and the expectations of kids of things like privacy are dramatically different than mine. They just grew up in a different world where they share, what they ate for. Who cares about what I ate? But
now, Tony, I will say I do that, Tony.
Okay, so you're on the edge of young here.
Yeah.
But their expectations are different. But they're also the ones that are going to sort of pay the long-term price, right, for the the issues over use of social security numbers and credits and all that kind of stuff there. And I think that parents also have to speak up in this too. I mean, and people are starting to become more aware of these things, right? The deal, criminals who have been taking over the identities of children, to get credit cards, right? To manipulate the credit system in their name could cause long-term ripple effects for people.
And go undetected for years. Like, parents don't figure it out, or kids don't figure it out until they turn 18 and try to go get a credit card or a car loan. It can go undetected.
It's really, well, it's a bit, I'm a hopeless optimist here, but it's kind of frightening. And to think of the long-term damage. And, criminals are focused. They're not smarter than us, but they have much clearer objectives, and they know what they're doing. And I always said, if you want to study capitalism, study bad guys, don't study the good guys. The bad guys are much better at capitalism, right? If you watch the whole, issues over ransomware and criminality, you don't have to write your own tools. You buy them. You don't set up your own botnets. You rent time. You don't have to monetize it. You hire people to deal with the messy physical world and the financial, the actual dollars and cents. So they're much naturally efficient when they think about these things. But from the point of view, as parents, do we think about the protection of our children in this way? Most do not, right? We don't think about, how am I going to protect my child's credit life, for long after I'm gone. And they need to, they need to create some of the demand side of this equation with the school systems to say, you're collecting information on my child, which is everything from, their special needs to their grades to their, to who they talk to, my address information, the contacts and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of this started to pop out here lately, in all the social distrust that we've seen, and people, that doxing people that they don't agree with politically or whatever. All these complex social factors. So I think we're kind of at a time of, we've raised awareness, right? Maybe we've got the Smokey Bear, not the Smokey Bear attention here, but now we need to turn that into prescriptive activity. Mark, what should parents demand? What should you insist upon? What do kids need to, insist upon? I think enough. And when kids know something, they all know something.
Yeah.
So the issues of, bullying and, really encouraging bad behavior. Once kids sort of figure out how dangerous this is long term, I think, they'll figure out things better than, frankly, us old timers will do, where we wait for the government to solve it for us.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we'll get ready to wrap it up here, but I do have an idea. Tony, Mark is a former teacher. We don't hold that against him whatsoever on this show, in a chat or a podcast with technology people. But I think what Mark needs to do to kind of get kids on our side and get them to go home and teach their parents, much like the fire thing. Do we have a fire ladder I can jump out the window with? We need Mark to develop a lesson plan on how to buy Bitcoin, and he's going to teach that to kindergartners.
On it.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark.
I'll be happy to be a reviewer for you. I love it.
Well, Tony, we appreciate your time. You spent an awful lot of time with us today, and we appreciate you coming on and talking about CIS and letting us know that we're not in this alone, that CIS is a good partner in this fight, and the resources, especially IG1, IG2, the other critical controls, that they're there to help us, and small bites, small pieces, a bite at a time, and you can improve your security posture with the critical controls.
Absolutely, and we appreciate the chance to, and again, to let folks know our strategic plan is like dealing with the problems that you guys face every day and that your listeners care about. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's one of the beauties of our small nonprofit. You want to talk to the folks directly responsible for what we say.
Sure.
Reach out to us. If you want to be on the teams that help create the content of CIS, reach out. We're a volunteer-driven organization. So,
and when you see them at a conference, go talk to them, because your folks are constantly at conferences. They were just in Missouri at a conference not long ago. They're here in the summer at a conference. So they are
stalwarts at being at conferences. Go talk.
And one of my standard lines is if there's something missing in your world, some piece of content, some writing, some tool that would really help you, we really want to know about that. And we can, we're not limited by sort of budget, right? When you operate on your volunteer model, this is one of the things I love about this second career is all these amazing people that you could bring together to create great content that again, we could distribute it 99.9% of it at no cost. And the idea is to empower folks like it. But I sure appreciate the time with you guys. And you were exactly as advertised, right? This is a fun conversation, and hope we get a chance to do it again sometime.
Yeah. Thanks,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We might not be the same. You share the same pain that I do.
The views and opinions expressed on the K-12 Tech Talk podcast are the personal opinions of Josh, Chris, and Mark, and do not represent the views or opinions of our sponsors or other organizations that we're affiliated with. The material and information presented here is for general information and entertainment purposes only. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.